Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of the Warwick F1 show. This is the 51st episode of the 2025 season. We are really getting close to the end of the season because we are reviewing the events of the Las Vegas Grand Prix situated on the Las Vegas Strip. Yeah, I still can't believe I'm saying that. I find that amazing. Anyway, what we're going to do today is look back at the event and see what exactly happened, including the big story of the double DSQ for both McLarens, which has opened up an opportunity for Verstappen to steal it, potentially, as Verstappen is now only 24 points behind the championship lead and level on Oscar Piastri's points. My name is Anwar, I am your host. I'm joined by my co-host Daniel, as per, and in this episode, we're going to just be assessing what happened, giving our ratings, giving our thoughts, as per normal, I guess. So, Daniel, just starting with you here, what would you rate this race out of 10? What was your assessment of it?
This race, for me, it's got to be, I think, a safe 7. I think it's always a little bit of a shame when the fastest car gets past the car that's on pole position, for example, after turn number 1, because it means we kind of denied a battle. We almost had one with Russell versus Verstappen, which would have been epic and would have fed me for sure for the week to tide me over into Qatar. But yeah, on as a race as a whole, I don't think it was the best Vegas. I think they've progressively it feels like they've got progressively fewer overtakes over the course of the year, but it was certainly not a bad race. We had a fair few talking points, but I think the biggest drama certainly happened after the checkered flag fell and everyone got just a little bit more excited about the championship, which seems to be flip-flopping so much these days, and it probably will in the coming weekend in Qatar as well.
It's really gone from it's so over in terms of the championship battle to it's potentially back and forth over the course of the last few, right? And I think Verstappen winning in the convincing manner he did, along coinciding with the fact that the two McLarens seem to really struggle on that circuit, as well as having the DSQ. I think it's a recipe for excitement for a lot of fans, and justifiably so, because now we get to have these kind of hypotheticals of, okay, what happens if the McLaren floor issue is something that they bring into the next race, or so on and so forth. So it opens up that kind of worms, and that's a nice kind of worms to have as a fan, for sure. I would probably put it down to a 6. I think looking at on-track action, we had Antonelli going through the field. He finished in 3rd. We haven't mentioned who joined Verstappen on the podium. It ended up being the 2 Mercedes who inherited those positions because of the DSQ to Lando Norris, which is really impressive, isn't it? Two Mercedes up there as well, with Antonelli in 3rd, starting from 17th. Hamilton also making a bit of a recovery from the back of the red to 8th. So we had a bit of overtaking, but outside of that, I don't think there was any big drama. There was the funny incident between Bortoleto and Stroll. That was something to watch, for sure. But we'll talk about that and more later. Before we do, let's go into the race rundown, shall we?
Okay, let's do it. Vegas Grand Prix was won by Max Verstappen, victorious in Vegas again, really putting the MV into MVP, if you will, as usual. George Russell in P2, he had steering issues, tyre graining, and then riding in a pink Lego Cadillac with Terry Crews post-race. That was a borderline uncomfortable race day for George Russell, but he still finished 2nd place, so it's not all bad. And it was Lawson after Brazil, but now it's Kimi Antonelli's turn to be crowned the new tyre whisperer of Formula 1 after 48 laps on that hard tyre, of course, that long, hard stint. And pulling away from Piastri at the end, which was incredibly impressive. P17 to the podium, obviously inheriting it after the McLarens were disqualified. And Charles Leclerc, being a typical Leclerc, finished 2/10 off that podium in the end. Very disappointing for Ferrari fans. Carlos Sainz in 5th, which he inherited. He did well to finish 7th on the road, given that he was both undercut by Piastri and overcut by Charles Leclerc within the space of about 3 laps. I might start a petition for James Vowles to do Williams' strategy himself, because I don't know what they were thinking there. He did end up 5th, like I said. Isaac Hadjar, he said it was probably our best weekend after he finished 8th at the flag on Sunday. Maybe they're not lying when they say that people in F1 have short memories. Nico Hülkenberg scored a few good points in 7th in the end. He is now tied with Bortoleto in the quali head-to-head, but he's got 30 more points than Gabby, which proves Nico's incredible racecraft. Lewis Hamilton qualified dead last after a troublesome quali, including using a bollard as an aerodynamic device and more, which was just bizarre. But he recovered to 10th, which became 8th, so a decent run for him. In P9 was Esteban Ocon. This is his first finish ahead of his teammate since Hungary 8 races ago, which I wouldn't have predicted coming into the year. But Behrman was just behind him, rounding out points, which obviously he wouldn't have got without the McLaren disqualification, but good job from him. In 11th was Alonso. Aston Martin were predictably slow on the straights. Maybe they were running a bit more downforce, which would explain the good pace they had in the wet qualifying as well. Yuki Tsunoda did okay, considering he did a 2-stop race, but not really okay because his car was the fastest. So is 12th really good after 2 disqualifications? No. 13th for Pierre Gasly, 3rd successive year of no Vegas points after qualifying well for Pierre, who did exactly the same strategy as Kimi Antonelli, actually. But, Pierre's in a tracteur, as they say, so he couldn't exactly extract the same pace from them. Liam Lawson obviously had damage after wheel banging with Piastri quite severely at the first corner, which it was the kind of move that I make on the F1 game to get past second place when first is within reach and I don't want to lose time getting past second. That's the kind of thing you do. Apparently he was avoiding Russell going into turn 1. I didn't really see it. Last of the finishers, Colapinto, again, I don't think I remember seeing him once that race. And into the DNFs, it was a horrible race for Albon, not least thanks to just driving into the back of Hamilton, which was a throwback to literally last race when Hamilton did exactly the same thing to Colapinto. Gabriel Bortoleto, he retired very early after the ridiculous move, the funny move, like you said, Anwar, getting revenge on Stroll for putting him out of his home race in Brazil 2 weeks ago, perhaps, which is a new rivalry they've unlocked, which led to a Stroll DNF. So the race-dominating potential that he showed in Q1 was sadly never realised. Come to a section that we don't come to very often, which is disqualifications. And here we find Lando Norris. He wasn't happy with P2, but he probably would have taken it given what's happened since. Joe Bauer, the FA technical delegate and bringer of ill tidings, came along with his headphones and his clipboard that he likes to carry around and sentenced him to at least a week of chronic championship stress through the form of disqualification. And of course, after Norris's car was found in breach of the regulations, Zach Brown had no choice but to take his sandpaper and get to work underneath Piastri's car as well, which is a little dig at the sabotage believers there. I don't believe that at all.
That was a good dig. I like that.
Thank you. He was also disqualified, and that rounds out everyone who raced in Vegas.
The point about Colapinto not being shown on screen, I feel bad for Mercado Libre. They spent so much money to get the sponsorship kind of plastered everywhere. We're not seeing any of it because that car is so bad. It's so far away from everyone else. Colapinto is probably better off just getting involved in incidents from a sponsorship perspective at this point. But that was a good race rundown. Let's start with the we don't normally do this. We're going to start with things that we just heard most recently from the race rundown. We normally start right at the top. This time, we're not going to do that. We're going to start from the bottom because the 2 DSQs is something that has massive championship implications potentially, as Norris lost his second place. Piastri was there to score a decent haul of points as well. How surprised were you, firstly, that we had these kind of rumours flying about them potentially needing to get checked again and potentially getting a DSQ? But what was your initial reaction to that?
Firstly, I was quite groggy because I actually slept through the entire investigation. I watched the race live, and then I didn't feel like staying up more after watching Mickey Mouse conducting a fountain display after getting 2.5 hours of sleep. And it felt like a fever dream. So I was like, I need more sleep. I can't do this. It's too much. So I went to sleep. I woke up at, I think it was 11 a.m. And I saw that the McLarens had been disqualified. And frankly, I thought I was still dreaming. Because, of course, I want a close championship fight more than anything. And this has helped it come to fruition that little bit more, and I didn't think it would. So I'd say it was, obviously it's heartbreaking for McLaren. We have to cover that off, and their fans. But I was quite pleased that the championship gap had closed up that much, especially from Max, because now I feel like this might give him the spur on that he needs to become, the extremely aggressive championship fighting driver that we've seen from him, particularly last year and in 2021. So from that perspective, I was glad, but at the same time, I was quite surprised because I didn't think, McLaren have obviously had a few mistakes in them this year. That there's been no surprise to that, especially on the operational side. The team at Woking have done a fantastic job to build what was a dominant car for quite a long period of the season. But the operational team have always made slip-ups. And this is another one at a very crucial time in the championship. I'm sure you'd rather have a double DSQ for a team early on in the season in China, for example, like Ferrari, than you would now at this point of the season when you've got, Verstappen closing you down. Unexpected porpoising is apparently the cause. I didn't really suspect it when Norris was backing off so much. I really did fall for the Will Joseph fuel propaganda that he was pushing. But yeah, I think it's really it's opened it up just a crack more when we thought that 30 points was a safe cushion for Lando Norris. I think it's going to be it might end up being very tight come the end of the season.
I think it's now a case of the door is ajar for Verstappen, right? He's just about in reach for it to be very much a conversation that we have to have. And that's a good thing, because now it looks a little bit more like the three-way fight that kind of was anticipated a few races ago and kind of fizzled away. Admittedly, it's still an absolute long shot, right? 24 points is a pretty healthy advantage at this point. And Norris has still got the ability to close us out in Qatar by outscoring both his teammate and Verstappen by 2 points over the course of the sprint race and wheel race, which we will do a preview of soon. But it's something that applies a lot more pressure into McLaren now, right? This is pressure that they probably didn't want. Do you think that's something that may affect them going forward in terms of now they've got to ensure that they at least get on the board with points because they can't afford another DSQ?
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? There's all this talk of McLaren are going to have to raise the ride height now so that they don't keep bottoming out and getting disqualified. I'm not so sure about that. I think Las Vegas is probably an exception in that there are a lot of long straights at the end of which bottoming is a serious phenomenon. Races like Qatar specifically, there is a straight, obviously, on the main straight, but it's not nearly as long as the strip. So I don't think they'll have to run it too high. Having said that, Qatar is a sprint weekend, so they won't get that much data because of the one practice session on where their ride height needs to be. So it was the same in Austin, right? They needed to back off a lot because they didn't, or they left a lot on the table because they put the ride height too high. They didn't know what to do with it, and it could have cost them that day if they hadn't made that decision, and it did cost them in Vegas. So I think they're going to have to exercise caution because all Lando Norris needs now is to finish on the podium. If he finishes on the podium in all remaining races, he'll be the champion. And that it goes without saying that they just can't afford to make those kind of mistakes again, right? It's a one-time thing. I mean, mistakes are rarely repeated in Formula One anyway. There's such a great group of people that know what they're doing and they're professionals. So I'm sure it won't happen again, and they will take measures to ensure that. Does that mean that their pace will drop off as a result? Potentially, but I don't think it'll be a huge issue. Obviously, there's talk as well of a device that the teams were using that the FAA decided to ban after Brazil, a device that kind of expanded the plank a little bit to ensure that they were above the legal limit on the plank. But the FAA have banned many innovations that McLaren have come up with over the course of this season, and they've still managed to win despite it. So they'll find a way, I'm sure. It's not like they're going to miraculously drop off the pace over the next 2 weekends, I think.
I think it's just like the other thing that kind of agree with your argument here is I don't remember from my entire time watching the sport having to see a team get 2 DSQs in a row, essentially. So a double DSQ happening once, and then the next race, the exact same thing happens again. It doesn't happen. So theoretically, this is statistically a very unlikely thing to happen. But it's the implication of, okay, and the noise as well, that may apply quite a lot of pressure and makes us concerned for McLaren, I guess, because they shouldn't be bottling it from this position. They've got such an upper hand and such a luxury of 24 points. That's not a small margin by any stretch. If they don't, if stuff goes wrong again, even if it's the fault of McLaren or even if it's the fault of just circumstance, they will be looking back at this race thinking, okay, why have we screwed up as badly as we have? It's just it's just very unnecessary in terms of the level of pressure and the noise. The noise doesn't help as well. Like the whole idea of the fact that the FIA have banned this innovation on the floor. The FIA have banned McLaren's innovations before. I think they've put more restriction in terms of the flexi wing stuff. I remember that being a bit of a discussion. Yet they've been able to navigate that with no problem, with very little issue. Theoretically, this exact thing should happen again. History in that case should repeat itself. But it's the fact that it's so late in the season. I think you mentioned the fact that Ferrari had their double DSQ early on. I absolutely agree with you when you say that they would much rather have it early on because it gives them more of a roadmap to recover those points. There is very little space for them to recover it, and in such a tight championship battle, which isn't sealed, it's something that is only going to embolden Verstappen and Red Bull to push that extra inch, push that extra mile, I guess, in order for them to really make a stand here, because it's opened the door for them. Let's see now if they can wedge that door open, or whether that door is going to close directly in their face. Let's move on to Verstappen because let's move on to the performance of the McLarens and he's on track, because I think there is probably a couple of talking points here. Firstly, just talking about Norris, who finished second on the road. He started on pole, which I was pleasantly surprised about. Were you, Daniel? Were you surprised about the McLaren being competitive in qualifying?
To be honest, I'm not even sure it was. I think Norris was just hands down the best driver in Q3. I think George Russell topped Q1 and Q2, and I considered him the favourite heading into that Q3 session. But Lando Norris was almost a second up on the current best driver, might have been Verstappen. Going into the third sector, after the first 2 sectors, he was almost a second up, is what I'm saying. Of course, he had that huge moment coming out of the chicane at the end of the strip, and that cost him quite a few tenths, but he had that in his pocket. That's why everyone was making mistakes, and the fact that he had made barely any in the first 2 sectors was incredibly impressive to me. It was a bit of a shame that he kind of undermined it a little bit at the start, because that was definitely a world champion lap that he put in qualifying. To be fair, the talent on show in qualifying was just a spectacle to watch. The fact that they only had 1 crash, and even then it wasn't a red flag because Alex Albon could just limp back to the pits. The car control that they were demonstrating, it's like Verstappen was in every single one of those cars, especially for the rookies. I think they deserve to be commended as well. So everyone was performing really well in that qualifying session, but I do think Norris was above and beyond. Piastri, he was unlucky in Q3 in that he came across Charles Leclerc, who had gone deep at one of the last corners, and it was a yellow flag. And Tom Stallard came over the radio and said, yellow flag in your sector. And Piastri backed off. But I think it was only a single yellow. So I think if he just lifted, he would have been okay to continue on his lap, which is the information that Hadjar received behind him. Hadjar was told, it's a single yellow in this sector. You're free to push after the corner. Keep going. You're going to improve, which is not information that Piastri was given. So the communication might have been a bit of a breakdown there. But Piastri wasn't on a great lap. He was over half a second down on Norris by the time they got to that corner anyway. So I don't think he would have ended up much higher than he did in his qualifying position anyway. So I don't think the McLaren was all there in that qualifying session. It was just about the tyre preparation and the driver being able to execute on their final lap, which Norris did perfectly. He wasn't even one of the last drivers to cross the line, and his lap was still that brilliant, which when you've got a wet session where they're just going round and round again, it's exceptional.
It was really good. It was a very. I'm glad that you made that point because Vegas is already a slippery track in of itself. In the wet, as much, people were saying that they were surprised it was not red flag. To be honest, I'm very glad that we got to see the quality of driver on show. We saw loads of cars having tank slappers, getting squirrely on the throttle. That was really cool to see. Norris excelled in that qualifying session, but something that he has excelled in recently has been his starts. And this weekend, he didn't do that because he started on pole, but he'd lost it by the time we reached turn one. He got a good launch. He just went. Do you think it was complacency, or do you think he just misjudged his braking point essentially?
I don't think it was complacency, to be honest. I think it was probably a combination of misjudging the braking point, an innocent mistake, but also braking on the inside of turn one at Las Vegas is always going to be a risk because there's much less grip there. I mean, there wasn't even that much grip on the racing line if you look at some of the other drivers behind and the struggles that they were having, because the track was obviously reset all the time, with cars going up and down, and also the rain that had come overnight to reset the track. So it was just really green and slippery, which Bortoletto found out and Lawson found out as well. And he wasn't the only one, but of course it was more widely realised because he was right at the front. I mean, I just think the chop at the very start was amazing. It must have been like looking in a mirror for Max Verstappen to just see such an aggressive move be done on him when he's got a slightly better launch, and to just be covered like that. In the end, Max made the right move, which was to back off a little bit and spot his braking point correctly. So, but realistically, it is only 150 meters down to the first corner in Las Vegas. It is a little bit embarrassing when you lose the lead there just on your own because you don't spot the braking point. But I don't judge him too badly for it. I think he probably would have lost the race anyway. I would have loved to see the battle between those two now championship rivals for the win. But, it is what it is, basically.
Yeah, I think the frustrating thing is it was on his own that he made that error. Maybe there was definitely pressure, obviously, because Verstappen's behind and you've got that subconscious thing in the back of your head. But he probably should have had that covered. But ultimately, I think you are right. I think Verstappen just had the outright pace today, and even if the lifting wasn't a necessity in this hypothetical world, I still think Verstappen would have got him. In all honesty, would have been an interesting battle to see how Norris kind of evaluated his moves there. Whether he would go really offensive and try to be aggressive with the way he moved on track to try and keep Verstappen behind, or would he just let him by and think, okay, for the championship, for the greater good, we'll lose the battle, win the war? That would have been an interesting discussion to have had. But let's talk about the benefactors of these two DSQs. Obviously, Verstappen is the biggest benefactor. Do you think he just had the outright pace today to win a win on the race day, not today, under pretty much any circumstance there?
Yeah, I do think so. The pace was just superior. It's simple as that. Red Bull put it in a good window for both qualifying and the race, really, just to get one up on Mercedes, which I think was the important thing because Mercedes were quick this weekend. So just to get ahead of them on the grid and then cover them off and be able to basically drive off into clean air, which is king these days, right? I think Verstappen, he had it closed off, basically. I do find it quite impressive that now the 104-point gap that he had to Piastri after Monza, I think it was, after Zandvoort, has now been fully closed to 0 points. He just capitalizes when everyone else is just kind of flailing around him, which is kind of what he did in the first corner as well, just picked his moment and rocketed around Lando Norris. And also, obviously, as I mentioned, saw off that challenge from Russell as well, which was brief, but it was a challenge nonetheless. Probably not the most stressful Vegas Grand Prix Verstappen's had. That was probably 23. But still a win, and I'm sure he'll take it.
Sure, he'll take it indeed. And the other benefactor was the fact that the two Mercedes ended up on the podium. Now, I think we both kind of expected the Max to be a bit more competitive than they were. But do you think Merck would be happy coming out of this weekend with a second and a third, or do you think they would be disappointed about the fact that they didn't have a car really competing for the win at any point?
I'm not sure even they knew what to expect coming into the weekend, to be honest. Given the inconsistencies in their car that there's been all season, it was kind of, we'll just see where we are in practice and we'll adjust our expectations based on that. Like I said, Russell fastest in Q1 and Q2 probably set them up for higher expectations than they were able to achieve in the end. But, it wasn't by any stretch poor pace that they had. I just think both of the drivers did a good job, executed a clean race, and also great strategy from Mercedes' side on Antonelli's car. And that's what was able to kind of vault them up the field. Antonelli's great tyre management. Was he managing or was he just pushing and the tyres just kind of survived? I don't know. There's kind of some debate about that. He was great, wasn't he? He just kind of cleared through the graining and then pulled away from Piastri and Leclerc. So that proves that Mercedes had enough pace. I'm sure they would have been happy to see their driver pulling away from a McLaren coming into the weekend. They would have taken that. So I don't think it's anything to cry about for Mercedes. Was the victory on the cards? Perhaps, but it was marginal, probably.
I think like you mentioned, I don't think the Mercs know where they are. I think that Merc is such a any given Sunday type of car. Like sometimes it will just come alive, and most of the time it doesn't. But those two, second and third, you can't complain. Antonelli once again showing a degree of talent that we knew he had, and we're beginning to get a run of races now where he is beginning to build a decent catalogue to look back on over the course of this year. I think his last 3 races have been very solid. Can't really complain about. Do you think this is him maturing to a certain level, or do you think this was him just simply? Do you think he's actually improved as a driver, or do you think he's just simply out of form and now he's in a rich vein of it?
Well, I don't know what's the biggest predictor of Antonelli's performance, to be honest. Is it access to titanium dioxide? Is it learning that the suspension that Mercedes introduced earlier in the season didn't actually suit him as much as it did George, and kind of reverting on those choices later on in the season, and then having, or is it having a better mindset management after his Monza telling off, shall we say, that he had? I think it's a combination of these things. Is he maturing? I think he thinks he's maturing. He has mentioned it in terms of mentally focusing and putting his energy into where he thinks it should be. I think that's part of the maturing process. Learning to say no probably as well, which is lessons that he's going to take into next year to make him more competitive. I think it's something that he's learned from George as well, because George has, he's always been very focused on being his own best athlete. And to do that, you do have to make sacrifices. And I think that's what Kimi's kind of come to understand as well this season, is that there are things that you need to kind of leave by the wayside. He's mentioned as well that the C3 tyre, which he did 48 laps on, he just kind of gets on well with it. I don't know what it is. He can just kind of, he feels it. He can push on it, and it doesn't give up too much on him. Like I said, there was graining for a while, but there was for everyone, and he just kind of got through it. And then the tyres were fine, to be honest. I think managing that tyre is something that he's just been learning about all year, and that's what it has been about, putting all the learnings that he's had together and executing a great race, a great recovery drive after what was a disappointing qualifying result. So I'm looking forward to seeing what he's got in the future, and especially next year, how he can build and make sure that the European season that he had this year, that fallow stretch for him, doesn't quite come to fruition as much.
Yeah, and I think it also must build his confidence a lot as well, knowing full well that he's just strung 3 good races back to back together. If he can continue till the end of the season, that'll probably put his mental in the best possible place ahead of a new reg set where everything's going to be up in the air, I guess. So I think that it can't hurt to have this good front runner form, and I think it allows him to really target those European races as the floor, because naturally, I think we can all agree it was really disappointing to see the level of performance he was putting up there. He just couldn't buy a good race, to be honest, or buy a good weekend. But I think it is. There's enough good points. There's enough bad points for him to focus on in the off season and stuff like that. So it's looking good for him. It was also looking good for one of the Williams cars because Carlos Sainz put an immense qualifying performance in and ended up finishing 5th in the Grand Prix. Firstly, I mean, I kind of expected the Williams to be one of the more competitive midfield teams on the basis of this track is very power dependent. If the Williams historically always had a good car in a straight line. Do you think that 5th was ever really something you expected, or do you think that Sainz's performance in qualifying has really uplifted their result over the course of this weekend and made a result that wasn't achievable?
Yeah, for sure. I think the result was achievable, even if it was a dry qualifying on the Friday night, I should say. Even if it was a dry qualifying, I think that Williams would have had the pace. I don't think they would have had P3 pace, which is what Carlos Sainz put in the end. But that's just the kind of driver that Carlos Sainz is. It's just to kind of turn it on when he needs to, and put it in higher positions than it deserves to be. It was almost not the case, by the way. Sainz, you know how Albon had those radio issues and he couldn't actually speak to the pit wall during the race, which I thought was ironic after saying that just the day before his race engineer did too much speaking, and the next day they couldn't do any speaking. I thought it was quite funny. Anyway, Carlos Sainz also had radio issues on the grid before the race. He couldn't hear or speak to the pit wall, but that was fixed on the grid before the race, so it almost didn't happen. Lucy almost experienced a great deal of pain on Sunday, but as it was, they fixed it. Sainz remained composed. He had, an okay start and just kind of bedded down. I mentioned it earlier. His strategy was definitely suboptimal, but I'm not entirely sure it would have changed the result. Anyway, he did fall back from Antonelli, Piastri, and Leclerc. He couldn't get close enough to capitalise on Antonelli's 5-second penalty, which we didn't mention in the Antonelli segment. But he jumped the start, of course. But that was so marginal; it wasn't really anything of note, to be honest. Could have happened to any driver. So I think Williams will be very pleased. I know they are very pleased with that result. 10 points. Albon's had his struggles. Albon's actually fallen off. It's the same pattern as Piastri, to be honest. Albon's last points finish was in Monza, just like Piastri's last podium finish was in Monza. And since then, their teammates have really stepped it up and started becoming forces to be reckoned with, while they're kind of languishing and getting involved in incidents and hemorrhaging points, really. So, a tale of two halves of the garages for Williams and McLaren.
I mean, look, I think it's also a case. You likened it to the McLaren comparison. I agree. I think this is the type of thing which now becomes a test for Albon, in the same way that the beginning of the season was a test for Sainz. Sainz was tested in the sense of he didn't adapt immediately. He had to work through a few issues in terms of the front tyres, particularly. Stopping, I guess, is kind of bad habit of bullying rookies. But he's he's now well and truly in a good rhythm, and he's turning out the results. And by contrast, Albon seems to have hit a dip in form. I think this now acts a bit of a test for him to see, okay, now you've got a teammate here who is being able to put out the results that, we expect. You shouldn't be too far away from Sainz. I don't think Albon and Sainz are that far apart as drivers. So I think the pressure is now on Albon, maybe in the last two races of the season, to at least try and get to the same level as Sainz. Because if Albon performs at his best and Sainz performs at his best, I think that is a really strong driver lineup going into 26 and onwards. So, I think Albon has pressure now, and it's not pressure he's had for quite a while, I guess. I don't remember the last time he had a really strong teammate, I guess. Do you?
Well, not when you've had Logan Sargent and Nicholas Latifi alongside you for about 3 years. No, that tends to not be the case. Obviously, it was Max, the last strong teammate that he had at Red Bull in 2020. I should correct myself. Albon did score points in the COTA sprint, but he hasn't had a top 10 finish in the Grand Prix since Monza. And Sainz is now 25 points behind him when the gap was much larger earlier on in the year. So, yeah, but I do agree in that Albon is kind of facing this struggle. Obviously, part of it is bad luck, just like it is for Piastri. So we've got more parallels. Bad luck. Not having the radio working is entirely bad luck. He couldn't do anything about that. He just had to kind of bear with it. He pressed the pit confirm button to say, I want to come in, replace my front wing. And then they didn't replace his front wing. And there's that radio section where you just hear him go, front wing. And, they can't do anything because then they just hemorrhage more times. And then he had to come in at the next stop to make it safer. And it was just a calamity. So I'm sure he's just going to be ready to go again, firstly in the next 2 races, but also prepping for next year has got to be at the forefront of his mind, just like it is. I know it is for Gasly, for example. He's just ready to focus on next year as well and just guide the team, as both of them are, into a new era, basically, and hopefully the start of something great for their Williams and Alpine teams with Mercedes power units.
It would be quite a story to see both of those teams fighting at the front. Now, they weren't the only benefactors and midfield teams, I guess, who have outperformed probably our expectations, because we had quite a few different drivers in the top 10 who come from midfield teams. Nico Hülkenberg got points, both Haas has got points. Which one of those 2 results are more surprising in your eyes? And either Kadjar as well. Which one of those 3, I guess, were most surprising in your eyes?
Well, first of all, I wouldn't say that Behrman was most surprising, because I did expect him to finish ahead of his teammate again, like he has so much recently, but that's not really a problem. Behrman did win my funniest moment of the weekend awards, by the way, when in qualifying. I don't know if you remember, but when he was sliding off the road and aquaplaning, and just before he hits the wall, when the car's still moving and still aquaplaning, he kind of throws his hands up in the air in confusion and frustration, which I thought was a great moment, very funny from Behrman. But back to the midfield teams, probably Hülkenberg surprised me most. I didn't think Sauber would go so well around Vegas, or as well as they did. Obviously, we know that Racing Bull is kind of an all-rounder, so if Hadjar puts it in the window, then he's going to perform well, and he did perform great. But Hülkenberg, was kind of the ugly duckling in the top 10, I think, just because I don't feel like he's been that high for a little while now. Obviously, he went on that drought from Silverstone all the way until Kota for having no points. And this is his best finish since that podium at Silverstone. So, he probably surprised me most. Obviously, we couldn't see what his teammate could do for reasons that were obviously very clear and very egregious. But, Hülkenberg did well.
Yeah, I agree. I think you can never really predict where those the kick sabers are, because it does feel like at least one of them gets involved in an incident or has a bit of misfortune, and I think there's just a bit of a jack in the box, I guess. Hadjar getting 6 is impressive again. Once again, just performing well. We haven't talked about the Ferraris. The reason we haven't talked about the Ferraris is because it felt like another bit of an anonymous weekend, I guess, outside of Hamilton making a bit of a comeback. But still, 8th in a Ferrari, is that really a lot to talk about? I don't really know. I think that's kind of what we've come to expect out of the Scarlet Ferraris. But the last thing I want to talk about before we move into predictions would be the Bortoletta's-Stroll incident. What was your takeaway from that? Because that made me chuckle.
I mean, what did Stroll expect? He just fully turned in on him. He left him no room to take the corner, Now, obviously, my opinion would be very obvious in that Bortoletto shouldn't have been putting his car there. Maybe he had a little fumble on the brakes, kind of missed the pedal or something. But, Bortoletto has now crashed in the last 3 races that we've had, including the Brazil sprint, of course, which was the biggest, and they've all been race ending for him and for Stroll, of course. So I think he's trying too hard. Obviously, that crash in the sprint came about because he tried the dive bomb on Albon in the Williams. I think he was racing a Williams in Vegas as well. He said he was trying to outbrake the Williams, but it just didn't kind of go very well because there wasn't as much grip as he expected and so forth. Stroll was just kind of a bystander for once in an incident, getting torpedoed. Maybe it's karma for the Kota sprint when he just kind of lunged on Ocon that time and just took out both of them. Reminiscent of that. Obviously, it was lap 1, turn 1, so mitigating circumstances and all. But yeah, I imagine you're thinking along very similar lines, Anwar.
Yeah, literally identical thoughts. I think rookies tend to have like a period of a rough patch. I think it's kind of natural unless you are a super talent. This is just Bortoleto having his rough patch. I know he didn't score for a bit at the beginning of the season, but I don't feel like he was necessarily poor in any of those races. These last few have been on of his own doing. The move was never on. It was all very bizarre move in truth. Bizarre attempt or lunge, right? So I think obviously it's bad. At the same time, he's a rookie. We shouldn't really be piling a lot of pressure on him, and he's proven to get good results. So it's not a massive story, but I want to see him recover from the last few, because 3 crashes in 3 races is not a good look by any stretch, right? Let's move on to our prediction segment to round out the show for this review. And I'm aware, Daniel, you went first last time, so I'm going to kick us off. I said pole for George Russell. That did not happen. I thought it was on as well, like you mentioned, right? The Mercs seemed competitive in Q1 and Q2, just so wasn't able to master the condition in the way Lando Norris did in the qualifying session. My top 4 actually is very good for my top 5. I put Verstappen to win, which I've got right. I put Antonelli in second and George Russell in third, which is 1 point each, just missing out on the perfect podium. And then I put Charles Leclerc in fourth, which he did finish in fourth, correct? If I'm not stupid.
Yes, he did. 0.2 of third.
Yeah, because he was because of the 5-second time penalty. Wasn't able to capitalise, but that's another argument. It was able to capitalise. It's got 3 points out of it. And then fifth, I put Lando Norris. Got a DSQ, so doesn't really count. Daniel, how about you? What did you go with?
All right. Yeah. Well, we're starting off strong with an Antonelli pole position. Try 16 positions lower, and you might be somewhere near. Yeah, great.
Yeah, it happens. It is what it is.
Yeah, I know. It's just a shame because I did so well in the rest of my top 5, which was a perfect podium, actually. I put P1 Verstappen, P2 Russell, P3 Antonelli. So we're getting 9 points there already. Before we head into P4, which is Oscar Piastri, which was the case before the disqualification. But I'm happy that the disqualification happened because it promoted Antonelli and also Sainz, who I put in 5th position. I predicted that midfield P5 is very difficult to predict, so I'm quite proud of that one, I'll be honest.
As you should be. It's very difficult for you to... The P5 does seem like it's a rotating door. You always get some type of surprise. So the fact that you've got that bang on the money is impressive. Let me go through Lucy's top 5, and then we can go to DNFs and random predictions. Lucy said that she joined me and said that George Russell would get a pole. Did not happen. She thought Antonelli would win this race, and that did not unfortunately happen. She said George Russell in second, which he did finish there. So that's 3 points there. She put Charles Leclerc in third, which is 1 off, so 1 point there. Piastri got DSQ'd, so no points there. And Verstappen in 5th. He obviously won. So 4 points for her so far. I'm on 8 and you are on 12, Daniel. Let me go through my DNF because I've got another 3-pointer because I put DNF Gabriel Bortoleto. The theme of me going for rookies has never failed and it will never fail. So I'm really happy. Well, not happy. I'm never wishing anyone's downfall, but we'll take that. I send it cheeky 3 points. I put my run prediction was Carlos Sainz in a tussle with a rookie. I don't think that happened from my memory, so unfortunately nothing there. He just drove, really. Daniel, how about you? What was your DNF and running prediction?
Yeah, Carlos Sainz was a bit too high up the order to be beating with rookies, to be honest. I'm glad you recognised it as an unhealthy habit earlier, though. Just kind of you're recognising your own maladaptive behaviours, and I'm proud of you for that.
Thank you. I'm happy that you can bring me respect for that.
You're on the road to recovery, hopefully. Anyway,
I'm in rehab.
Rookie rehab. Okay, DNF, I put Lando Norris, which didn't happen. Look, I'm not even going to argue that because Anwar's made it very... I feel like I made it very clear earlier in the year as well that a DSQ doesn't count as a DNF, so I'm not even going to try that. And
don't try.
I won't. And random prediction was aged very well after the first corner, which is every single rookie finishes and they finish on the lead lap. And then we had Bortoletto absolutely shunting into Lance Stroll and 2 rookies who got lapped, and they were the only ones who got lapped. So that was great. What about Lucy's DNF and random prediction, Anwar?
I mean, to be fair with you, you got all your points in the first part of it, right? So you don't have a lot to complain about. 12 points from the top 5 is pretty impressive. Lucy's DNF was Esteban Ocon, which did not happen from because he finished in the points. And the random prediction was at least 2 last lap overtakes. From my memory, was nothing, right?
Nope, 0 overtakes on the last lap.
So unfortunately for her, she only got 4. She got 4 points, which is still a decent enough haul. Just in a weekend where we had pretty good hauls between the 2 of us. 4 sticks out like a bit of a sore thumb. But that brings us to the end of this review episode of the Las Vegas Grand Prix. I want to thank my guest Daniel for coming, my co-host Daniel, coming along for the ride. We'll be back again this week for an episode bringing you a preview for what could be a season-defining and championship-winning race in Qatar. So we'll see you in the next episode. Thank you very much for listening and watching from your seat at home, and goodbye.